Hello folks. We are going to start discussing how the United States moves away from isolation policy to begin intervening in World War II. So you should be turned to your notes. Your objectives for this video. So after you have watched this video, you should be able to analyze the progression of American isolationist policy. And you should also be able to describe what actually led to U.S. involvement or intervention in the war. So I really briefly just want to recap what's going on from our last video. So remember, after the Great Depression, you've got this rise of dictators throughout Europe and in Japan as well. And Americans at first, when the war breaks out, want to stay isolated. Examples of this are the Neutrality Acts, cash and carry policy, and the good neighbor policy. However, Hitler's invasion of Poland really pulls the United States towards the Allied powers to help them out as much as possible without actually intervening in the war. So I'm going to discuss several examples of how America gradually moved into intervening in the war without actually fighting. And the first example that I can discuss with you is destroyers for bases policy. Now, this policy allowed Great Britain to actually get 50 United States destroyers. These are Navy ships. And in exchange for that, the United States would be able to receive 8 military bases that were previously under the ownership of Great Britain. Now, this actually did not violate the Neutrality Act because nothing was being bought or sold. It was a trade. So that's how the United States actually got around the Neutrality Acts to make this happen. And this represents a real change in American public opinion because this shows that Americans actually favor offering support to the Allied powers. And at the same time this is happening, the military budget actually increases. So all of this is evidence of the United States preparation for the war. Even though they're not actually a part of it, you can tell that Americans are starting to feel a little bit better about the idea of intervening, and they're ready to spend some more money. So another step. So if that was step 1, we're going on to step 2. Not long after destroyers for bases, the United States Congress passes the Lend-Lease Act, or the Lend-Lease policy. Great Britain by 1941 is running out of money and obviously running out of resources, and so are their allies. So Roosevelt and Congress kind of worked together to come up with this idea that it would be okay for the United States to lend, which means let the Allied powers borrow supplies, or they would be able to pay for those supplies after the war. So it's not so important the logistics of it. What is important though is that this statement came out of the Lend-Lease Act. The statement is, if it is vital to the defense of the United States, it is okay to help other countries with weaponry and with other supplies. So you can see right here. So this is a gigantic shift because before the United States was saying, well, cash carry policy says that if you pay cash for it immediately, we'll be able to sell it for you. But now the Lend-Lease Act is saying, we can give you some help and don't really worry about paying us back right now. So again, this is another huge shift towards intervening and helping out the Allied powers. And then one more step and kind of the final tumble is the Atlantic Charter. So Roosevelt and Winston Churchill meet in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which is why it's called the Atlantic Charter. And this is really symbolic of each of them moving halfway to help accommodate the other. And this Atlantic Charter said that basically the United States wanted to support democracy and ending the war. So this was kind of the U.S.'s official declaration that they would be allies with Great Britain. This was a real political move that supported, ending the war and transitioning all countries to democracy. Okay. So even though we've got all of these governmental policies, right? This is all the government and Congress acting. Congress acts based on what people want, right? So I want to take a second to think about public opinion surrounding the war. And we're actually going to study this a little bit more deeply later. But I want you to know that there is an anti-war group out there that was committed to that isolationism and not getting involved in the war. And they were called the America First Committee. But there was also a group called Fight for Freedom Committee who were pro-war. They wanted the United States to become involved in the war, so they were interventionist. So, Franklin Roosevelt attempts to really shift that isolationist opinion in the public to garner more and more public support for the war. Countries can't just go into the war like that whenever they want. The people of the country kind of have to be on board. So, Roosevelt gives the Four Freedoms speech. And the four freedoms are depicted here, but he really used that as a tactic to get to the people, use emotions to convince people what he wanted. So you can read these excerpts here of the Four Freedoms speech, and you have a few questions on your notes page that you should answer about these things. So you might want to pause the video so you can read. Okay, so what is the big turning point? We've got the government slowly transitioning to becoming more and more involved in the war. And the turning point that actually forces the United States to move and declare war is the attack on Pearl Harbor. But the attack on Pearl Harbor actually is provoked by something. So the United States began restricting iron, steel, and oil from the Japanese. So those are really important products that you need to fight a war. And the United States thought this could be kind of a gentle way to not actually start a war and go send troops to fight in Japan, but to support the Allied cause. We'll cut off supply lines to Japan and they won't be as successful. So the U.S. also sends military to the Philippines, which is right here, right next to Japan. Remember, the Philippines was a U.S. colony, so the U.S. sends the military there to kind of begin preparation. Japan sees this as really annoying. They're offended by these things. So what they do in reaction is the attack on Pearl Harbor. So the attack on Pearl Harbor eventually leads to the United States declaring war on Japan. Days after the U.S. declares war on Japan, the whole Axis powers, so Germany and Italy, also declare war on the U.S. So that's how the United States actually became involved in World War II. So what you should do now is answer your questions and flip your card to green.